This is my son, Freddie. And in 2050, Freddie will be the same age that I am now. And in 2050, Freddie and all other New Zealanders will be able to look back and say, have we done it? Have we? Has the transport sector, has the infrastructure sector, have all of us here today done all that we can to achieve net zero carbon? And in 2050, that is largely how our efforts today will be judged. This is the basis for Transpower's latest report, Whakamana I Te Māori Hiko, released after 8 months of rigorous analysis. I've been in the energy sector for nearly a decade, and I can confidently say that this is the most impactful piece of work that I've been involved in. Whakamana I Te Māori Hiko translates from te reo to mean empowering our energy future. That is empowering a highly renewable, affordable energy future that enables New Zealand to meet its climate change commitments. If we make the decision today to transition our fossil fuel-based transport sector onto electricity, we could meet our emissions targets, save hundreds of lives per year from reduced air pollution, and finally, we could reduce the average household energy bill by 25% by 2035. But most importantly, to do this, we need your support and your collaboration. I'm going to cover 3 main themes today. Firstly, why transport is New Zealand's largest and most economic emissions reduction opportunity. Secondly, how the economics for electric transport are changing rapidly and why the benefits will be profound. And thirdly, what the barriers are to achieving this future and what we're going to need to do to enable it. So in New Zealand, we have 2 main climate change targets. The 2030 Paris Agreement, which is to reduce emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. Now, this covers all emissions, and transport represents 20% of all emissions in New Zealand. The second one is the net zero carbon target by 2050. And so this excludes biogenic methane, and as a result, transport represents roughly 33% of emissions that contribute toward this target, so a significant opportunity. But we're not doing a great job. In the last 30 years, transport sector emissions have nearly doubled, and they've now overtaken energy sector emissions, which have been on the decline for over a decade. If we're going to have any shot of meeting our climate change commitments, we must turn this around in the transport sector. Otherwise, we're not going to get there. We need to start bending the curve now. Now, in order to do this, it's actually really important to understand where emissions in the transport sector come from. And so 80% of emissions in the transport sector are from light transport. That is, light passenger vehicles and light-duty trucks. 10% are from heavy-duty trucks and buses, and the final 10% from rail, aviation, and marine. Yes, a plane bellows out a lot of emissions, but Air New Zealand only have roughly 120 planes in New Zealand. There are over 4 million individual passenger cars, and this is why light transport is such a significant contributor towards New Zealand's emissions. And electricity is the prime fuel for decarbonising light transport. And this is why, in Whakamana I Te Māori Hiko, we forecast that 80% of emissions reductions in the transport sector by 2050 will come from electrification. But we're also going to need hydrogen to play a critical role if we're going to get to zero emissions transport, and also biofuels. So for this slide, I'll just do my Jim Hickey, the weatherman impression. So what you can see here, further east, are the kilometres travelled by different transport types. Moving further north is the weight of different vehicles. And then the different colors represent the different types of fuels and the applicability for different transport applications. So as you can see in the bottom left here, lighter vehicles that travel shorter distances, prime for electrification. The further you move out, we really get into the space of hydrogen and biofuels. And this is why in heavy trucks, for example, hydrogen will play such a critical role. And so this leads us towards our forecasts. In light transport, where electricity is the prime fuel, this demonstrates billions of kilometres travelled in New Zealand, forecast out to 2050. We forecast that nearly 20% of kilometres travelled will be electric by 2030. The real inflection point is around 2025, and I'll get into the economics soon. In 2035, nearly 45%, and by 2050, light transport is almost fully electrified. The story is a bit different for heavy transport, which includes light-duty trucks, buses, and heavy-duty trucks. So roughly 10% by 2020, a third by 2040, and about 55% by 2050. And that's more in the buses and light-duty trucks. In the long-haul heavy freight, this is where we think that hydrogen has a really important role to play. And this transformation is going to be rapid, really rapid. This is a graph from the early 1900s in the United States of the transition from horse and cart to petrol vehicles. Petrol vehicles went from 2.5% market share to 94.5% market share in just 20 years. And in the 10 years between 1910 and 1920, cars went from 10% market share to 80% market share. This is economic disruption. And when new economic alternatives come along that are significantly better, transformation can happen at pace. And I really believe that the electric transformation from fossil-fueled vehicles to electric vehicles, plus new transmission-as-a-service models, and further into the future, self-driving autonomous vehicles will be the largest transformation in transport since the transition from the horse and cart to fossil fuel-based vehicles. So, what are the economics underpinning this transformation, and why will the benefits be so profound? So the total cost of ownership, which represents the capital cost and the operating cost for vehicles, for many EVs today, is already better than that for fossil fuel-based vehicles. And then in the next 5 years, we expect that to be the case for most vehicles. But it's not just the total cost of ownership which matters. The upfront cost also matters. And this is why analysts are so interested in a concept called sticker price parity, the point at which the upfront purchasing cost of an electric vehicle is equal to that for a fossil fuel-based car. And this shows that this point is roughly 2025. Add into the mix that electric vehicles are 70 to 80% cheaper to operate than petrol cars, and that might be less in future with road user charges, but it will still be a significant saving, and the economics are compelling. And this is the inflection point in the market, we think, 2025. Come 2030, these economics will have flown through to the second-hand car market, and that's why we predict a rapid uptake. It'll be cheaper to purchase an EV than a fossil-fueled car, and much cheaper to run. Why wouldn't the sector move to this mode of transport? And these forecasts are driven by the battery cost, which you can see here. Bloomberg New Energy Finance forecasts this halving over the next decade. And this is a continuing trend. Battery costs have reduced by 75% in the last 5 years. And as the costs of solar and wind decline rapidly, the cost to power these electric vehicles will also be significantly lower, and the cost to power hydrogen for heavy transport will also be lower too. And this is the great news. Decarbonising transport will save customers money. We forecast that by 2035, the average two-car household with one electric vehicle will have energy bills 25% lower than today. And if they have two EVs, 50% lower than today. Yes, road user charges might reduce some of that reduction, but the reduction in energy costs for consumers is going to be really meaningful. And now this graph is quite remarkable. So this is a recent graph from the Ministry for the Environment outlining marginal abatement cost curves for electric transport options in the year 2030. Now that's an economicsy way of saying how much will it cost to reduce each tonne of emissions if we transfer to electric in the year 2030? Well, the answer is it's negative. So what that's telling us is we will save the economy money, we will save consumers money when the economics are like they are in 2030 to transition our transport sector to electric. And so it's no surprise that the electricity revolution is already occurring. So Westpac now has over 30% electric vehicles in its fleet. Countdown are rolling out electric trucks for delivering groceries. Alsco has the first large-scale heavy freighter in New Zealand. In public transport, Metlink has recently committed to purchasing 98 electric buses by 2023. That's 22%, that will be 22% of its busing fleet in Wellington. KiwiRail continue the electrification journey, and Wellington will have its first electric ferry by the end of this year or early next year. So, that's an exciting, low-cost, low-emissions future. What do we need to do to get there? So range is often touted as a barrier to uptake to electric vehicles, and currently today it is. But in the last decade, the range of a Nissan Leaf has tripled. And as battery cell density continues to improve, range anxiety will become a thing of the past at some point in the next decade. Now, charging infrastructure is really important. So here on the New Zealand map, this shows ChargeNet's and Tritium's electric vehicle chargers across the network, already hundreds of them. There are many 50 kilowatt fast chargers as well. And ChargeNet has just started rolling out 350 kilowatt fast chargers. So that will be able to charge a vehicle 340 kilometers in just 10 minutes. But in order to really have the significant uptake in electric vehicles, we're going to need a larger and faster public infrastructure charging network. And so that is one of the challenges. And finally, policy. So the economics of electric transport will be so compelling that it will take over anyway. But in order to meet our 2030 emissions targets, we're going to need some policy to accelerate and to kickstart the electric vehicle market. So this graph illustrates new car purchases in Norway. The amazing thing here is that in the year 2020 to date, 69% of vehicles purchased in Norway, of new vehicles purchased in Norway have been electric. And in September, for the first time, over 80% of vehicles purchased in that month were electric. And this is what happens when you have ambitious, strong, and coordinated policy to target EV uptake like they have in Norway. It's working. So, what do we need? We need strengthened policy, government and councils to rapidly convert their fleet to electric, and this will stimulate a second-hand car market in time. Need to address upfront capital cost barriers when the total cost of ownership is lower for electric vehicles, but the capital cost is higher, so that consumers can access the benefits. And we need to potentially provide behavioural incentives for uptake, use of transit lanes, etc., those types of incentives that have been so effective in California and Norway. As I mentioned, we're going to need improved charging infrastructure. And then this is a really important one. We're going to need improved electricity pricing tariffs and smart charging to incentivize off-peak charging of vehicles. What this will provide is lower cost options for consumers to charge off-peak, which will save them significant amounts of money and will accelerate the uptake of electric vehicles. At the same time, smart charging will mean that when customers come home between 5 and 7 p.m. on a cold winter night and plug their electric vehicle charger in, the charging will start at some point between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. in the morning. And so when the customer wakes up, they'll still have exactly the same charge as if it started charging between 5 and 7 p.m. And what this will do is it will reduce the amount of infrastructure that electricity networks will have to invest in by billions of dollars. And electricity networks are going to have to incorporate this into their planning and investment to ensure that we can enable this future, and I'm really confident that we can. And finally, we're going to need the new renewable electricity generation to back this up and power this electric vehicle revolution. So, at the beginning, I told you about where I see my son Freddie in 2050. And for the audience here today, I invite you to ask yourself 2 questions. What is your contribution going to be? And who are you going to do it for? Because it is up to us to safeguard the future for our children and our grandchildren. And I truly believe that many of the answers to this lie in Transpower's most recent report, Whakamana I Te Māori Hiko. So go and read it and work out what your contribution can be to achieving this future. Thank you very much.